Before we begin, here's how to earn continuing professional education credit for attending this session. Gain valuable insights by attending the podcast, then complete the assessment test to download your certificate. To do this, follow these simple steps. Click on the link in your description to access the session. Create a free account and attend the podcast. After the podcast, take the assessment test and download your certificate. It's easy, and it's free. We highly recommend checking out our subscription. Let's get started.
When you started collecting this data, you're collecting this anonymously, which is brilliant, But how did you earn the trust early on from the people who were understandably nervous to share the salary info? Did you run into those bottlenecks?
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure there's a faction of people who are just not submitting, right? And that is what it is. That's okay.
Yeah.
I built this very intentionally with the test in mind of like if someone offered me $1 million to track down who made this one specific entry, could I do it? And I wanted to make sure that the answer to that was going to be no. So before even ever launching this, I built it in a way, right? Like there's kind of a flow where the submission goes somewhere, gets submitted somewhere else, et cetera, where, for example, because a lot of this data is stored in Google Docs or Google Sheets, I didn't want there to be a trace of the submitter Google, of the submitter Google address that
Interesting. Yeah.
created the submission. And so there was a whole flow of the data in the back end to avoid that being the case. And I think, as time went on, I think I probably earned that trust as well because there's been a lot of, copycat projects. I bet you there were probably some before I did this as well, where they kind of launched the sheet and then they would turn around and try to monetize access to it
Yeah.
or things like that, where there have been data collections in the past that have proven not to be trustworthy. We're
Yeah.
like 4.5 years into this, and never once have I kind of gated access to it. So you win that trust over time, I think.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to We're Trying to Figure Out. I'm your host Saul, and today we're trying to figure out something that's been a bit of a mystery for decades. How much are accountants actually getting paid? Now, in most industries, tech, law, finance, compensation transparency is becoming a norm. But in accounting, it's still the Wild West. No one really knows what the person next to them earns. And that silence breeds confusion, frustration, and sometimes flat out inequity. Enter our guest today, Dominic Piscopo, a former Deloitte consultant who decided enough was enough. He launched Big Four Transparency, a crowdsourced platform now home to over 21,000 anonymous salary submissions from accountants across hundreds of firms. Dominic, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Saul. Great introduction, and I'm excited to be here. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. The pleasure's all mine. So let's start from the top. Tell us a little bit about your career. How did you get into the Big Four world and what eventually pushed you to start Big Four Transparency?
For sure. I mean, I feel like this is a common story for a lot of people who study accounting. I knew I wanted to be in business, but I didn't really know what. And so I had kind of figured at the time it was just easier to switch out of accounting into something, but not vice versa. And so I was just like, you know what? I'll just start in accounting. And then I personally ended up really liking the kind of managerial type of stuff. I got really involved in all the case competitions in university. I think we still might be the only team ever in Ontario to win JDC in tax. So like I really kind of leaned into that. I really, really enjoyed the kind of case cracking resolution type of side of things. And yeah, I went into school like really not plugged into what was going on. Like I couldn't have named four of the big four. And then I started recruiting and you kind of just get this story told to you that like, hey, if you're a strong student, if you're ambitious, like it's big four or nothing.
Mhm.
And so I followed that route. I would say I got pretty lucky with my experience. I had at the Ottawa office at Deloitte, like there was a really, really good partner. I got paired up with like the coach that I got paired up with was like the wonderkind of Deloitte Canada. This guy is like a literal genius. And so I got a really good experience there. The thing that was always a sticking point for me though was compensation. So throughout university, I was good at making money. Like I had jobs that paid super well. Right out of high school, I had done like a summer doing credit card sales where I had actually made a ton of money. I was working at one of the kind of more trendy bars in the city where I could make a ton of money. And I was putting in all these hours at the firm, and it was always just like the paycheck would come in. I was like, oh, like, I maybe made more at the bar this week than at the firm. And so for junior people, that was a huge frustration.
Yeah.
And at one point, I actually went around and asked everybody at my level at every single firm in the city what they were making. And I realized we were undercompensated. We were actually not competitive with any of the other firms in the city. And to his credit, the partner that I spoke to at the time, probably kind of naively, ended up actually, arguing for us. And my whole cohort got a, marketplace increase. So we all got a pretty substantial at the time increase in compensation. And that sort of made me realize, sometimes there are mismatches to the market. Like firms don't always know these things. And I kept that kind of in the back of my mind later on. So ultimately, I left the firm. It was entirely, for the most part, it was mostly over kind of money again. And I was also a little bit of a square peg in a round hole. Like I was super involved in business development and things like that. Didn't like the compliance work and the structure of you get rewarded with more work if you do your work quickly. And so I ended up leaving ultimately for a controller job at a startup. And that's where I sort of got interested in entrepreneurship. So where I was working was with a very, very well-known entrepreneur in my area. And, he would share little tidbits here and there, talk about his journey, and I was really fascinated. And the biggest obstacle to that to me felt like I don't know how to code. I don't know how to build a website. And Big Four Transparency was born out of basically just my first project of like, I wanted to figure something out that I could build over a weekend. So it's not super technically impressive, but whatever. That people would actually use. And it went viral. It went crazy on Reddit. And so that really helped kind of kickstart things. And eventually I started getting inbound from firms saying, we're trying to use this data, but it's not in a very usable format for us. So I built a suite of tools on top of the data so that they could very easily interpret it to figure out their internal compensation. And that's sort of where the business side of this was born. And so I think my third or fourth customer ever was one of the big four, and that kind of told me I needed to take things more seriously.
Nice, nice. A full circle, if I were to say, because you're
Yeah,
wondering about it, and then you have one of the big fours also inquiring into it. So I guess they were also like, we gotta figure out,
yeah,
you know.
yeah. Yeah, and a
But
big mission behind it is really like, these discussions used to anyways happen all very much behind closed doors.
yeah,
And like if you tell me the market is what it is and that's why I'm getting paid what I'm getting paid and it's true, fair enough, right? Like I just kind of wanted this to bring discussions more, out into the open. Like if you tell me you're paying me at the 75th percentile and that's fair for the market, I have no argument, right? And so I just thought it would be a lot better for everyone if there was this level of transparency and compensation. And obviously the market agreed. So
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I really love the name as well. The name just completely resonates to what it's about. But and the most important thing is, you are trying to solve a problem, and you are significantly solving it. You got like, I'm pretty certain when you started off this weekend project, you didn't expect that it will snowball into this platform with
no.
tens and thousands of data points and everything, but you're still solving it, and it's helping a lot of people. But I
Thank you.
guess the most curious question is, and it's okay if you cannot answer this, but why do you think accounting of all industries has stayed so opaque about pay?
Do you want to earn CPE credit? Take this course of MyCPE 1 to earn free credit. Click the link in the description to get started.
I mean, I think there are other industries like this. Like I would say law is probably like this as well, but like there is a certain element of, disproportionate returns. Like when I started off, this was the worst paid job I could possibly go and get.
Okay.
Like, a lot of the starting positions in finance were higher. Even some, like in marketing as well, were higher. Geez, I could have gone in to do like a laborer job and been making more out of the gate. Bartending was making more. All of those things, like, and that's just what the market is, but like the lower end of the scale was very, very low. I think it's improved a little bit, and I'm from Canada, and there's different kind of market dynamics here as well. But and I was from a government town too, and I was just like starting salaries in government were so much higher too. And I think that is kind of a little bit of what breeds this sort of taboo around compensation is that in most fields, your boss's boss is probably making two or three times as much as you, but like in accounting, your boss's boss is probably making 15 or 20 times what you're making as like an entry level salary.
Yeah.
And I think because of that dynamic, I think there was probably more of a push towards not discussing this too openly. And it's also a field where like there's very measurable, trackable metrics
Yeah.
where two people in a same position might also be compensated differently. And sometimes that's valid, right? Like if one person's selling a ton of business and their billable hours are higher and things like that, like that might be a fair thing,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
to have in place. But other times, like we have the data on this,
Yeah.
externally hired first year managers, for example, are paid 13.7% higher than internally promoted ones because of like this loyalty tax.
Oh my God.
That's something that I want to shed a light on, right? Like that's something that's an issue in our industry, and we're creating a lose-lose incentive system where if you want to be paid at the top of the band, you basically have to leave a job that you might otherwise love. And so, I think a lot of the opacity um, around compensation has come from that, where it's like it is such a fast increase in salary that, it's just a sore spot to talk about.
You know, as you're saying this, you talked about the loyalty tax and how, hiring external people have got a significant higher rate as compared to, people being promoted internally. I just pray
Yeah.
that, the people who are listening into this podcast, they aren't one of those who have been into the system for a long time and then they're like, you know what, I think it's time I change my job because I'm getting a better pay outside.
Yeah, and I
But
mean that's not like
yeah,
automatic, like it's not
yeah,
everywhere, but
yeah,
that's the US average in
yeah, that's the
2025.
US
Yeah.
average. But now, I'm gonna have you to, like take a trip down your memory lane when it actually started, when the data
Yeah.
started rolling in, when all this data started rolling in from Reddit and all these people are submitting it. What surprised you the most? Were there like any patterns or any red flags that made you go like, wait, what?
D Definitely like the biggest surprise to me was that loyalty tax, like how much more external people were paid. And like
Uh-huh.
I'd heard stories of that at the time where it was like, oh, if you're not happy with your comp, you can just jump firms and you'll go get a better pay package somewhere else. And then
Yeah.
you'll get disappointing raises over the next 3 years to bring you back into the band, right? That was like the most shocking thing to me. Another thing that surprises me is just how low job satisfaction is on average.
Oh my.
Um, that's one of the fields that we report on, and there's not that many firms whose average response is more than a 7 out of 10,
Oh.
um, which is
So
pretty disappointing. Like tells you that there's a lot of work to
yeah,
be done in the
a
industry.
lot of improvement.
Um, yeah, what's been cool since then is that like it's actually been gradually increasing. Like there's a very clear trend, less so in advisory and consulting work, but in audit and tax, there's like a very clear upward trend in job satisfaction, which is cool.
Yeah.
Um, but then, it also depends on your level of experience. Like seniors
Yeah.
are highly dissatisfied in their jobs, on average.
You don't
So,
say.
yeah.
That's strange. Well, when you started collecting this data, you're collecting this
Hmm.
anonymously, which is brilliant. But how did you earn the trust early on from the people who were like understandably nervous to share the salary info? Did you run into those bottlenecks?
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure there's a faction of people who are just not submitting, right? And that is what it is. That's okay.
Yeah.
I built this very intentionally with like the test in mind of like if someone offered me $1 million to track down who made this one specific entry, could I do it? And I wanted to make sure that the answer to that was going to be no. So before even ever launching this, I built it in a way, right? Like there's kind of a flow where the submission goes somewhere, gets submitted somewhere else, et cetera, where, for example, because a lot of this data is stored in Google Docs or Google Sheets, I didn't want there to be a trace of the submitter Google, of the submitter Google address that
Interesting. Yeah.
created the submission. And so there was a whole flow of the data in the back end to avoid that being the case. And I think, as time went on, I think I probably earned that trust as well because there's been a lot of, copycat projects. I bet you there were probably some before I did this as well, where they kind of launched the sheet and then they would turn around and try to monetize access to it.
Yeah.
Or things like that, where there have been data collections in the past that have proven not to be trustworthy. We're
Yeah.
like 4.5 years into this, and never once have I kind of gated access to it. So you win that trust over time, I think.
Yeah.
And with the fields that we have, some people at smaller firms have in the past emailed me. I'll get a couple emails a month being like, "Hey, I think I kind of overshared and I sort of outed myself on this thing. Can you delete it?" And it was again always just no questions asked. Like,
Yeah.
"Yep, no problem. Tell me what row it is. It's gone."
Yeah.
Um, and so I think it's just like a repeated pattern of showing that you are worthy of that trust to
Nice.
be able to get there. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Not a lot of people get to where you are today. That is a
Thank you.
phenomenal, you know. Now, you mentioned about, one of the, I think the fourth customer was one of the big fours. So from where are you seeing the interest more? Is it coming more from the top firms, the top 10, top 50 firms, or are also the regional firms and the boutique players also starting to care about having access to this data?
Really all over the place.
All
I think
right.
my first customer was like a 5-person firm. Second customer was like a 50-person firm. Third customer,
Nice.
200-person firm, and then the big four. And then now, like, as it goes, I'll onboard a 10-person firm. The same week, I'll onboard a top 50 firm. So it's pretty spread out. I will say like different firms use this for different purposes. So
Okay.
smaller firms will use this typically as, their main or only source of compensation data, whereas like any, I would say probably top 100 firm, I would expect is probably using this and one of the legacy providers, which I mean is great. You need to trust the numbers you have, and if having like
Yeah.
another provider in place is going to help with that, that's awesome. And you need the most feedback as possible from the market. Um, what what we're replacing in the big firms often is that they would be part of two compensation surveys so they could cross-check against each other, which is like it's largely like the same data being cycled around twice to them. And it was just like a bunch of administrative burden. Whereas
Yeah.
now it's like, here's these comp surveys, and here's this like an anonymously collected crowdsourced database that you can get access to. That's like a completely different thing than what those are, right? And each have their trade-offs and advantages and disadvantages. I like to think we have more advantages than disadvantages when compared to those, but
Yeah.
um, I think for some of the larger players, that's the way to go.
Brilliant. Now, I want to dive into the juicy stuff,
Yeah.
21,000 plus entries. I'm saying 21,000, I'm pretty certain it's more than that as well. Now, you got a lot of data points. I don't want to talk
Yeah.
about all the data points because that will probably take another podcast. But if I were to ask you, what are the top 2 to 3 trends that you're seeing in the data? Anything beyond what you already shared? Anything that you want to share?
Access latest and trending CPE courses with my CPE One Unlimited Access subscription. Subscribe now.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we look at full year data, so 2024, for example, versus any other given year, one of the biggest trends was disproportion of salary increases. So
Right.
juniors in firms were having their salary bands increase far more than senior people in the industry. So I don't have it open here, so don't quote me exactly, but I think it was
Yeah.
something like um, um, analyst or staff level people had seen, 4% increase in 2024 versus senior managers seeing a 0.8% increase in the year.
Yikes.
And that's not like the raise that the person is getting. That's
Yeah.
basically the difference between a first year staff in
Yeah.
2023 versus a first year staff in 2024, or a first year senior manager versus a first
Yeah.
year senior
Yeah.
manager in the next
A
year, right?
comparative. I get it.
And it was also very disproportionate across different service lines. So audit and tax increased kind of similarly, and I actually ended up cohorting them together because they increased in a very similar pattern. Whereas advisory and consulting increased a lot less, albeit from a higher base, though. So
Yeah.
advisory and consulting were already making more, but the gap like tightened a little bit, which I thought was interesting.
Uh-huh.
And that's great sales and marketing material for me, which is awesome. Because I'm like, you can't just go with the average 2% increase to all bands. Like, that's just not cutting it. That's not what's happening whatsoever, right? And then what's been really cool this year is digging into the trends. I got to present this at the PE Summit in Chicago about a month ago. Um, but like the trends around private equity in public accounting. So like as soon as a deal's announced, you see like a big hit to job satisfaction. But then basically once the dust is settled and the deal's 18 months old, job satisfaction is pretty much right back to where it was. And then looking at, their comp increases disproportionately higher than the rest of the market. Hours increased ever so slightly more than the rest of the market. And there were some really cool things to unpack there about the perception versus the reality at a lot of these private equity backed firms. And I'll say
Mm-hmm.
kind of the most salacious and like interesting one of all is just breaking down the average job satisfaction at different firms. I found
Yeah.
that to be really, really interesting, where like some firms had, consistently like real patterns where like every year they're leaders in terms of job satisfaction from their employees. There's some other firms, unfortunately, where every single year they're in the bottom of the cohort. And you can cross check that against hours worked at those firms. So, like, there's a firm in particular who I won't name, but like performed really, really poorly on job satisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
But the hours worked that employees were self-reporting were actually among the lowest of all the firms as well. So
Huh.
like that points to like deeper culture issues and things like that, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, there's some really cool things to dig into in the data for sure.
Well, data is a new oil, So
Yeah,
the more data we have, the more we come to know. Have you, I mean, this is just an offbeat question, because with accounting firms, offshoring is also a norm that has been there. Have you ever had somebody, like submit data from an offshoring standpoint? Like,
I do.
yeah,
This is not something that like we sell on the basis of because there's just
yeah,
like it's too there's too much of like a dispersion in that data and like there
yes,
isn't that much of it because it's just not markets I'm targeting. But yeah,
right.
we have data from like all around the world, like countless countries that we have data from, but like other than so North America, we do fully serve that market. The UK, we're getting there. We're starting to get a good amount of data in the UK. But other than that, it'll be like India will probably have a couple hundred responses, which I mean, great. Like I'll host that data if someone from India gets value from that. That's awesome. Same with the Philippines, but like it's also often in a currency I don't fully
Yeah,
understand. So we have a
true,
field to indicate the currency, right?
true, true.
Um, so, but yeah, we do have a little bit of data from all around the world.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not sure if this is a data point, but do you have a data point from where you're able to determine whether younger professionals are prioritizing salary, or are they more focused on flexibility or work-life balance?
I don't personally collect that.
Yeah.
I've helped with data collections on other surveys. I know
Yeah.
Trimerit does a survey on that front.
Mm-hmm.
That might include that I've helped with data collection for, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't personally have that or like kind of claim to be the expert on that. Yeah,
And I noticed that when we were talking earlier, when we were planning this podcast, you had kind of like showed me that sheet, and I had looked into it. You're also segmenting this based on the regions, like tier one, tier two cities, and everything
yep,
as well. So I know that you don't have the data in front of you. So whatever you can grab me from your memory, any regional differences that you've picked up, like NYC
for
versus
sure.
Dallas versus fully remote setups or something, anything that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, people in office jobs in smaller cities are reporting higher job satisfaction than people in like major metropolitan areas. So that's definitely a trend. Um, Other than that, I mean, there's huge salary differences between like a very high cost of labor versus like a low cost of labor area. Um, and yeah, that's probably kind of the main things I could tell you, like geographically speaking. I haven't gone in to see if like, is there a specific city where people are just miserable? But definitely people actually like in the smaller cities tend to report higher job satisfaction, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
Um, Part of that, I wonder too, I think I had broken this down. I think people with remote jobs as well in these smaller geographies were super happy. And I think some of that comes to wage arbitrage, right? Like if you're
Yeah.
living in a low cost of labor area and you can get a job from a firm that's paying the average for the country, then you've got a pretty great salary on your hands, right? So,
Absolutely, absolutely. You got the best of both worlds. You're able to work from home and everything is taken
yeah,
care of. Now, there is a series called What Ifs, where you're thinking alternate scenarios. Now, I want to play a little bit
yeah.
of what if with you. All right.
Okay.
So, what if every accounting firm that we have today just published their salary bands tomorrow? Okay, would that fix everything or would that cause complete chaos?
Well, so salary bands tend to be pretty broad, right?
All
And
right.
so like there's a lot of jurisdictions where that's becoming law. But it's just like it's too broad to be helpful, right?
All right.
Like if there's a range between 70 and 90,000, like uh, every firm at a given level should be within that range. And that's
Yeah.
not really actually going to help me figure out what,
Yeah.
given, what firm pays more competitively than another firm or if I'm being paid competitively. So I just think these bans are too broad to be helpful.
True, true that, completely. Like, I mean, like, honestly, I feel like, we're heading towards a world where, opacity is a liability. It's not really a strategy. We need
Yeah.
to be more transparent,
Yeah.
So, another what if scenario, if you were to sit down 5 years from now, all right, what does public accounting compensation look like?
I think equity is going to start to be a much bigger driver of it, right?
Nice.
Particularly with like private equity's involvement. But I think some other firms might, even if they stay independent, they might either A, feel pressured to involve equity compensation, or, they might just want to do that to remain competitive so that, if everyone's offering equity, well, you can't just offer that same salary with nothing in return. And so I think equity is going to be a huge piece or phantom equity, right? Profit share,
Yeah.
whatever that might be,
Yeah. Yeah.
just to keep a cleaner cap table. But I think that's going to be a huge increase. Um, I think we're going to keep seeing a lot of dispersion in like, a separation of like higher paying firms and lower paying firms. I think we're going to see more kind of winners and losers. And I think
Mm-hmm.
people are going to start picking their firm somewhat based off of the firm's actual performance a little bit more than they are now. Of like,
Nice.
oh, my firm grew 20% organically last year, so I'm going to go there. Um, which also ties into the rise of equity compensation.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, I pray that that happens. Fingers crossed. Equity
Yeah,
companies is always it's very lucrative. It's good for everybody.
yeah,
So
for sure.
that's yeah. Now that's pretty much it. Dominic, I don't have anything further to add. But before I let you go, where can folks go and check out the platform and contribute to the salary transparency movement that you have?
For sure, yeah. Big4transparency.com. Four is like the actual number four. So big4transparency.com. There's an anonymous survey there. It takes about 2 minutes to fill out. Really simple, and you're helping the next person who's kind of in your shoes, trying to figure out what they should be paid. Not a huge percentage of people are sharing their data as is, and that's something I'm trying to work on fixing. But I also don't want people who are uncomfortable sharing to be completely blocked out. So you can still access the data regardless. But yeah, if you feel comfortable sharing, or even sharing most of it, but if you don't want to share your gender or things like that, that's totally okay as well. Still helpful to people. So yeah, big4transparency.com, or you can get in touch with me personally on LinkedIn. It's probably a good place. I'm very responsive there. Dominic Piscopo.
All right. All right, folks, you heard it right. I'm going to be having the website as well as Dominic's LinkedIn available in the show notes, so you can get in touch with him. And look, as Dominic said it, if you're not comfortable, it's okay, but you could be helping the next person. And that's how karma
Yeah,
works. Right? Do good unto others and good things will happen to you. Right? So, all
exactly.
right, with that, big thanks to you, Dom, for joining us today and pulling back the
Thanks for
curtain
having me.
on this. I think it's one of the most tightly held secrets in the profession.
Not
So
anymore. There we go. Go check
not
it out.
anymore. Not anymore. We got Big Four Transparency. And to all the folks who are listening in, if you haven't checked out Big Four Transparency, go take a look. It's for the profession, by the profession. So, with that, I conclude today's podcast. Until next time, take care and keep innovating in everything that you do. Cheers.
Access latest and trending CPE courses with my CPE One Unlimited Access subscription. Subscribe now